When you embolden people, when you empower people, the haters, you're going to get violence. And so why would anybody who's morally responsible want to intentionally incite other people? We live in a sick society that some people think it's good to taunt other people.
What happened this weekend past in Garland, Texas, has erupted a nationwide debate about whether or not the American Freedom Defense Initiative's free speech event was protected under the First Amendment. When does hate cross a line? When is out looking for something to happen in order to make a political point dangerous? And what's wrong with drawing out the killers and getting them to justice before they destroy anybody else? Our guest is Professor of Law at Harvard University, author of the book Shouting Fire, which discussed Justice Holmes' famous line about shouting fire in a crowded theater. Pleasure to have Alan Dershowitz here again. Alan, good to talk to you.
Thank you very much. Look, it's not even a close question. I don't think there's a constitutional scholar in the United States who would tell you that what Pamela Geller did, whatever you may think of it, is not protected speech. How is it different from imams preaching hatred against Jews in mosques? How is it different from Farrakhan? Every day he makes speeches like this, caricaturing Jews. How is it different from so many other provocations? You know, without comparing Geller to the great Martin Luther King deliberately picked the cities he was going to march in order to provoke violence. He says that. And clearly the Constitution requires that you protect the speaker and the marcher, and you go after those who claim to be provoked. And you don't need a Pamela Geller to provoke radical extremist Muslims. Look at Solomon Rushdie. He just writes a book and he has a fatwa put on him.
But I want to make sure that I'm hearing you correctly, Alan. I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. You said that she is not, in your opinion, not protected free speech under the First Amendment, correct?
Oh, no, I think it is protected.
It is protected. Okay, I'm sorry.
Question. It's not even a close question. She is as protected as Martin Luther King was, although I don't want to make any comparisons between the two of them, just as protected as Martin Luther King was in provocatively walking through the cities in the South, knowing that it would provoke violence. The Constitution requires that you protect the speaker, you protect the marcher, you don't protect the person who's engaged in violence.
What about, and I'm going to go back to the freedom of speech issue in the First Amendment, because I've had these discussions here the last couple of days, and frankly, I've had people not able to give me the kind of answer I know you will. In the First Amendment, freedom of speech, Schenck versus the United States, 1919, this is the case here. It is not covered to incite actions that would harm others, for example, shouting fire in a crowded theater. How do we then take that, and how do we then balance that out against what you've just talked about and what the other ruling is, which is Cohen versus California, 1971?
Well, I wrote a whole book about how bad an example shouting fire was. Remember, shouting fire in the theater is not really speech at all. It's the same as setting off an alarm. It's not intended to appeal to the intellect, to the mind. It's intended to appeal to the adrenaline, to the legs. Run, get out of here, there's a fire, quickly. The closer analogy would be if somebody handed out a leaflet in front of a theater saying, this is a dangerous theater, don't go in it, because there may be fires that they're violating the rules. So I think the shouting fire in the theater is the worst analogy any justice has ever come up with, and it's caused more constraints on freedom of speech, and it's one of the dumbest arguments that any justice, including the smart justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, ever came up with. And thank God it's no longer the law. The law is now that anything is protected unless it incites your own people immediately to violence. If I get up in front of a group of people and give them the name and address of somebody and say, go to that person's house and lynch him, that's not protected speech. But if I stand up in front of a crowd knowing that they will not like what I say and say things, and they surely should not have the power to veto my speech and censor it. Otherwise, there'd be no free speech every time I speak about Israel.
In your opinion, then, Alan,
try to shout me down, saying that I am creating an unsafe space for them. That would mark the end of free speech if we didn't allow the Pamela Gellers of the world to provoke people like the two people who tried to shoot and kill her.
In your opinion, then, was it a smart thing to do?
No, not necessarily. I don't defend certainly the Nazis walking through Skokie, but I defended their right to provoke Jews and Holocaust survivors in the way that they did. That's part of what the First Amendment is all about, allowing you to provoke and show the world how easily people are provoked. Remember, again, what Pamela Geller did is no different from what Solomon Rushdie did in writing the book. And Solomon Rushdie had a fatwa, and he was almost killed. And Theo Van Gogh, who made a movie, was killed as a result of that. So you don't need Pamela Gellers to provoke radical Muslim censors. And radical Muslim censors today are the only group in the world that are using violence and the threat of violence to try to suppress speech that's offensive to them.
Then let me do this,
Alan.
Alan. About a minute or so that I have left then. Let's look at it from this way then. Is it then a good thing, because when you bring up the First Amendment and free speech in this country, to use this sort of an event to draw these people out, to draw the killers out, to draw these people out and to basically shine a light on them and say that these are the ones that we must be fearful of and the ones that we must protect ourselves against?
Well, the problem is that you could overdo it, and they could actually have fired and killed the guards and gone into the assembly room and killed lots of people, as other radical Muslims did with the Charlie Hebdo case. So, no, I don't think it's a useful law enforcement tactic. If it was, law enforcement would be using it, and people like Pamela Geller shouldn't be taking over law enforcement. If law enforcement wants to have stings, they know how to conduct them. I don't think we want Pamela Geller conducting First Amendment stings for us.
About 30 seconds I have left. Pamela Geller and her people, they're talking about they have lawyers. They're all set if there's any sort of legal action against them. So could they protect themselves if anybody brought any sort of suit against them for hate speech?
It's not even a close question. They would win unanimously in the Supreme Court. There wouldn't be a single dissenting vote.
It's something that we're going to watch for a while. And by the way, Alan, it's interesting, too, because her people say that they are going to have it. As a matter of fact, Robert Spencer says they're going to have these events again in other cities. So we're going to be watching to see what happens there as well. Alan, it's always...
and there will be some cities that will try to stop them.
Yeah.
So I think we'll see the case come to the court.
Well, they can't stop them because, again, it is free speech, and that is the beauty. That is the beauty of America, regardless of whether you agree or disagree. Alan Dershowitz, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, take care. Breaking back after the news. Snake bites meth head surfers and what the letter F really stands for. Careful. Of course, this can only be a trip to Outland. We question everything. This is MidPoint.